Okay, we wait, Ana Maria.
Sorry, Gabriela, what did you say?
You tell us when we will start.
Okay. Garance, is Lesia there?
Not yet.
Okay.
Is Elsa also online already?
Not yet either. I am writing to her.
Yes, Elsa is online now.
Oh, great. Hi, Elsa.
Yes. Okay, I suggest we start, and Lesia will catch up with us. Is that okay?
Great.
Okay, excellent. So good afternoon to all of you from Unesco Paris. It is so great to see all these familiar faces. All of you are really great specialists in this specific area, and it's really a pleasure to see you. We are very happy to welcome you to this third edition.
Alors, nous sommes ravis de vous recevoir à cette troisième édition des consultations régionales d'experts sur les stéréotypes sexistes avec l'objectif qui est le nôtre de changer les mentalités. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes en Europe. Je suis Anna Maria Majloff et je travaille à la section inclusion et droit de l'Unesco. Alors, pour rappel, vous avez de l'interprétation disponible en
globe below on your screen. Let me now introduce you first of all to Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, who is our Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, who will deliver the opening remarks and also set the agenda. And she will be followed by our moderator and
sera suivi de notre modérateur et consultant,
founder and director of Sean Clark Consulting, and an expert on gender, masculinities, and harmful stereotypes. So I wish all of us a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Maria. You forgot to say that you are the head of the section, but also the gender champion here in our social and human science section. Great to see team, and more than anything, great to see your panelists and the participants. This is how we get our ideas. This is how we refresh our thinking. This is how we, by coming together not only with experts in the field, but with people with your commitment to the equality cause, that we can advance more practicable solutions, identifying where the problems are and how we can develop more meaningful agendas. So again, great to have the Ratna, Ellen, with whom we work in generation equality, Yada, Jan, and Lesia, and also Elsa. So great to have you. Today we are on a regular consultation for Europe. I have to say first that yes, Europe is leading in terms of institutional settings, in terms of regulatory framework, in terms of outcomes for women. Europe is a force for good in many ways because it established benchmarks. Many of the countries in the European Union are the top performers on equality. But when you dig down the gaps and the way women fare in Europe, we still find results that are not acceptable. And therefore, because it's Europe, I think that we should do better. No need to say, the pandemic has really had a terrible impact on so many ways. In general, for men, for women, for boys, for north, south, it has been a catastrophe. But the reality is that it has also been a mirror in which we see every single vulnerability that we did not address previously to the pandemic. And one of the vulnerabilities is the condition of women. And we know how much the lack of protection, the overrepresentation in certain sections, the overburden of family care, and more than anything, what Ana Maria was mentioning, the stereotyping, the mindsets. Where do you belong? What are you supposed to do? Who do you think you are determined from very early years. And then it rolled out into behaviors and ways of acting that are not really acceptable. So this is where we want to go. We want to go, of course, to recognize that there are gaps and there are problems, and then to see how much we could advance, because UNESCO, who is the social and human science, is looking after the policies for anti-discrimination, anti-racism, but it includes a very strong gender angle, and we're going to deliver on the work to counter stereotypes, to fight with this kind of prejudice and biases, including in the artificial intelligence world. But I have to say that in our 193 countries, there are many that still have discrimination and inequality by law, which is terrible. But in the European Union, even there, 2019 data shows that 33% of women have experienced physical or sexual violence, 33%. And 55% have been sexually harassed. In 2020, these numbers further increased as domestic violence rose from 20 to 72%. Is the lockdown, is the confinement, is the stress, is the despair, but it's also the way we handle things. And with a score of 67.9 out of 100, the European Union is at least 60 years away from reaching gender equality. And these are studies from the European Union, these numbers. The gender pay gaps stubbornly at 16%, and the gender pension gap at 30%. And then 80% of care in the EU is provided by informal carers, and 75% of whom are women, coming particularly from migrant backgrounds. So when you start to dig down in different groups, in different profiles, you see that then the disadvantages seem to accumulate and create these feedback loops that are impossible to solve. 44% of Europeans still think that women's most important role is to take care of home and family, and 43% think that men's role is to earn money. That's why role models is so important. I have to share with you that when there were the elections in Germany, one of the gender experts in the OECD where I used to work is German, and her daughter is German, and she asked whether men can run for being a chancellor in Germany, because she has always looked at Madame Merkel. And so role models matter, but we have so few women at the top positions still, so few women in the tables where decisions are taken off. And then this is due to these imbalances of the role model, but also of the burden of home care and childbearing that is mostly in the hands of women, or where men perform a smaller share. Women in the EU spend 22 hours per week on unpaid care and domestic work against 9 hours per men. And then, of course, this influences children, because they see, they just live this, and they believe that women belong at home, and that of course engineering and all of these disciplines are for boys. And then this repeats with the digital world. You see these gaps pale. When we compare the fact that 80% of all the developments on artificial intelligence are done by male-only team. So we know the facts. So we know the solutions. We know how much dual parental leave. We know how much legislating equality. We know how much creating incentives to redress this unbalanced distribution of care work helped, but also to break the stereotypes, and also to try to have a way for women to advance their careers and break the glass ceiling and repair the broken strong, and so all these elements that you all know well. But the fact is that is there. All the countries have made progress with increasing the parental leave in a take it or leave it basis, on trying to look for campaigns and for ways in producing more role models, the quotas in the boards, which is important. And then producing the evidence. The evidence, for example, in Germany, where fathers' parental leave allowance was increased from 3.5 to 36%. And this led to an increase in employment for women from 42 to 58%. And so let's look at these stories of success, but let's also redouble the efforts to break these paradigms, to break these outcomes, to reinforce our commitment of people, of institutions that believe that this is not acceptable. This is the basic tenet of why UNESCO is increasing its efforts in this field, why we are going to produce a very concrete programs. And I thank Tim that is helping us with his experience and his knowledge on men for gender equality. And how can we eradicate harmful social and cultural norms and draw attention to outdated practices that younger generations also can get rid of. And I'm sure that we will be learning also from the European Commission with their gender strategy and all the elements that are included there. We know that President von der Leyen has increased the representation of women. We were happy yesterday to see the first female vice president in the US, but also having a parity cabinet. I think this should become the rule everywhere, having a parity in the post of decision making. And so we really want to learn from you. And we hope that, yes, it was 2020, we couldn't go for the generation equality, but I know that Fumsile and her teams are just working hard to make 2021 count, and we are there with them to advance. We will deliver on the MER for gender equality, our master classes. We are launching an observatory for women in sports, and we will be looking into the questions of, as I said, artificial intelligence. So great to have you here. I think had been long my speech, and so I rather learn from you, and I rather give the floor to you to really shed light on these untractable issues. I don't want to call it wicked problems, because they're not. I think that we should be able to resolve them. And I think a nice place to start is to change this mindset and to break the bias and the stereotyping. So over to you, Tim, and now I will become your listener.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for those wonderful opening remarks. Yeah, it's a real privilege for me to facilitate this conversation. A lot of my work has been outside the European Union, but I've equally, as a European myself, been very committed to working and researching on these issues in the region. And so it's a huge pleasure to be part of this conversation. And in a moment to introduce the fantastic panel that we have with us. Let me just say a word about the new UNESCO initiative, that the flagship program that Gabriela referred to. As Anna Maria kind of also noted at the start, this is the beginning of a range of regional consultations. This is number 3, and we're really excited to be having this one on the European Union. And each of these conversations is feeding into a set of deliverables for UNESCO that frames its broader and helps to frame its broader commitment to gender equality. And in particular, we will be in the coming months producing a research report, creating a network of role models that will support us in this endeavor, and hopefully launching a global advocacy campaign. And so everything that comes out of this conversation today will help to frame this work that will be taken forward. Let me explain the format. I will begin with an interactive conversation with the fabulous panel that we have today, and that will last for around 40 minutes. And then we will go to question and answer from the people who are joining online, and we have already over 100 people participating, so thank you. And then we will go back to the panel and seek your input from those who are attending on recommendations, and particularly what should UNESCO do? How could UNESCO take forward this challenge that Gabriela laid out for us at the start around the need to shift mindsets and harmful stereotypes? And then we'll conclude with a number of next steps. This will be a very participatory process. Please, as the speakers are talking, those who are listening in, please use the chat box to provide your comments. Please also use the chat box as we progress to provide your ideas about solutions that we need to address for this problem. And also when we come to the end and talk about recommendations, I will also ask you to use the chat box to provide your thoughts and recommendations, and we will collect everything as inputs to the future endeavours of this important work by UNESCO together with everybody else. Let me introduce the distinguished panel that we have, and I'm really thrilled. We have such a great breadth of experience and representation, and we are exceptionally grateful to everyone for taking their time out to join us today. Dr. Dubravka Simonovic is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, and a visiting professor in practice in the Centre for Women, Peace and Security at the LSE. She has chaired CEDAW, the Council of Europe's task force to combat violence against women, and led on the elaboration of the Istanbul Convention, and has had a distinguished career as a diplomat for the Republic of Croatia. Elsa Dolan is Professor of Philosophy at University of Paris 8. She is a contemporary philosopher and feminist who advocates practical feminism based on social struggles that combat sexism and racism. She has received the Bronze Medal for her research on gender, is part of the new French intellectual scene supported by the French Institute, and has spoken at the Night of Ideas and published widely. Hélène Moline is Senior Policy Advisor on Innovation at UN Women, leading innovation projects and the forthcoming Generation Equality Forum's Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation. She supports large manufacturing and service sector companies to integrate gender responsiveness and launched the She Innovates program that provides mentoring to women launching startups. Elida Esketashulu is a human rights lawyer, research fellow at the UNESCO Chair for Gender Equality and Sustainable Development, and founder of the NGO We Need to Talk, which fights period poverty and stigma around menstruation in Turkey. She is a Girls 20 ambassador, a member of the Beijing Plus 25 Global Youth Task Force, and a PhD student on international human rights at the University of Istanbul. Jan Lunduas is an author, specialist in male role models and gender issues, and from Lund University. He is a teacher of Swedish and history of religions in Lund, Malmö, and Hässleholm, and of English and history at the International School in Hanoi. He lectures widely and has had a distinguished career working as senior research officer in the Swedish International Development Agency and within UNESCO's Division for Gender Equality. Lesia Radelicki is a member of the Cabinet of Commissioner for Gender Equality, Helena Dalli, within the European Commission. Lesia has previously coordinated a European women's organization advocating for policies to close the gender pay gap and combat violence against women, and has conducted trainings worldwide on women's political empowerment and participation. What a fantastic panel, welcome. Let me remind each of the speakers to please keep the remarks to no more than 3 minutes maximum. Dubravka, could I turn to you first? One of the things that Gabriela mentioned at the start is that the EU, compared to some other regions, does have far more advanced laws and policies, and you've spent a lot of your career and right now looking at the legal and policy framework around violence against women. As we think about the key challenges that we face, what do you think are the key issues around gender norms, gender stereotypes, and why are we still needing to address these issues despite the effective frameworks that we have in place?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for inviting me to participate at this important regional cooperation expert consultation as UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. In the title of this mandate, it's indicated that mandate is also looking at causes of gender-based violence against women. And here we have to address what you have posed in your question. all those gender roles and prejudices on roles of women and men that are based on ideas of superiority or inferiority of, in this case, superiority of men and inferiority of women, basically patriarchal stereotypes that we are seeing in Europe and in other parts of the world. It is right to state that in the Europe, if we look at legal frameworks in different countries, we will see that de jure discriminatory norms that could be identified as norms based on gender stereotypes are more or less changed, but still practices and gender stereotypes are very present in Europe as in all other countries around the world. And the challenge is how to identify those gender-based harmful stereotypes in each and every country. I have visited 10 countries during my term, and in all countries, in addition to discriminatory laws, different forms of gender-based violence against women and girls, it is possible to see different harmful gender norms and stereotypes that are directly causing gender-based violence against women and girls. What is very important is to look into human rights framework, and my mandate is human rights mandate. So in each situation, when I am addressing whatever country, I am using UN human rights framework and also regional human rights framework. So if we look at UN human rights framework, it is very important to see that CEDAW convention as a key gender sensitive human rights treaty on women's rights is addressing also gender stereotypes. So CEDAW is having specific Article 2, Article 5, and Article 10 related to gender stereotypes. And this is excellent for human rights treaty to have specific Article 5 that is calling all states to abolish and modify cultural patterns and stereotypes that are based on this idea of inferiority of women and superiority of men. And also there is specific Article 10 that is calling states to address education with respect to gender stereotypes. And when I was in CEDAW committee, it was clear that in many books that are trying to be objective and gender neutral, we are still having many gender stereotypes related to women as a weaker sex, women and girls as projected in those different books from a harmful gender perspective. It is also important to look at the Europe from regional strong convention. What is the Istanbul Convention? Convention that is new convention addressing gender-based violence against women and also domestic violence. And in this convention, there is also specific Article 12 that is calling states to eradicate gender stereotypes related to roles of women and men that are harmful. We have to recognize that those stereotypes could lead to violation of human rights of women and girls. They are directly connected with those discriminatory norms and practices. So
Great.
it is
Sorry, Dubravka, I'm just going to jump in there because to keep the conversation going, that's
okay.
Exceptionally helpful. Elena, could I, and I think really important in terms of the framing, and let's return to some of those issues. Elena, could I turn to you next, particularly thinking about your work around advancing innovation and women's entrepreneurship and reflecting on what you've just heard also from Dubravka. What would you say are the key issues and challenges that we need to address around gender stereotypes within the harmful norms within the European context?
Well, thank you. What's really interesting, I think, with the issue of technology and women in STEM is that whatever region or country you look at, the issues are very similar and the results are very similar. So Europe is not in a much better space than other regions, and in some cases even a bit behind. What we see the most is that when you look at technology, especially when you look at the future of work, at the new ICT jobs that are coming on the market, women are really missing. And you look at the data, and the representation of women in tech look like the representation of women in the workforce in the 60s. So we are really behind. And stereotypes are a very important part of this issue. And we can look at it from different angles. We have issues with social norms at school and in communities. We have issues with stereotypes in the workplace. So there are many different angles that need to be addressed and need to be put together to address this situation. And COVID has been, I think, a very good example. When you have a crisis coming, usually the societies have a tendency of going backwards. And I don't know if you all realize, but whatever the country, all the scientists, all the experts that we saw on TV for COVID were men. And Gates Foundation did a very interesting study, and it shows around 6 countries, all regions. For Europe, it was the UK, but globally, it shows that women were less than 20% of experts that we could see talking on COVID-19. It shows that they are really portrayed as experts. And for innovation and technology, what we see is that their voice is not heard as much when it comes the time to generate ID or to come up with creative suggestions. Study has been made even in the Nordic countries that should be the most advanced, when it shows that it's a reality and that they are behind. So I think that for innovation and technology, it really shows that we are at risk if we don't address stereotypes, if we don't help young girls and young women to go behind what the society is portraying of what is the role of women, or what is an innovator, and what we saw in the media, it's mainly male figure, then a whole generation is going to be lost and is not going to be able to have access to the same opportunities as men.
Great, thank you very much, Elaine, and for bringing in this issue of leadership, which has come up, or women's insufficient leadership has come up in other regions. Elida, could I turn to you as a young leader yourself, if I can describe you as that? I'd appreciate your perspective on this question, and what are the main issues and stereotypes that you see that need to be addressed within the region?
Thank you very much, Tim. I'll try to summarize. I could talk for hours about this issue. Some of you might know I'm coming from Turkey. It's a geography which is struggling with the shadow pandemic, as described by the Secretary General of the United Nations. So a couple of things that I've observed so many effects of gender stereotypes, particularly in Turkey, which is obviously quite struggling with gender inequality problems. But I want to focus on one particular thing. Since we are locked down in houses, which is without a doubt not safe for everyone, we have seen that the gender stereotypes have turned into this system in which the domestic workload and the mental load on women have increased incredibly. Because schools are closed, generally women are disproportionately responsible for taking care of children, taking care of their education, and in the meanwhile trying to work from home, which is an incredible and a very disproportionate load. So one very obvious type of gender stereotyping and gender roles that I've observed has been that actually research has shown that women academics have remarkably published less during COVID-19 times based on their workload and their domestic work responsibilities. So it's just an example, but I think it's a remarkable example. And since as UNESCO, we are quite interested in and invested in academia and education, that is something that we need to keep in mind.
Thanks very much, Elida, and I think also for reinforcing the unpaid care burden question. Jan, can I turn to you next? Dubravka mentioned the challenge around patriarchy, and I think in many respects it underlines a lot of what we're talking about here. You have done work around men's roles. I'd appreciate your perspective, Jan, on that and to this question of the main issues and challenges we need to address in Europe. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's interesting that we are at UNESCO now, because men's role and the issue of culture, I think, is extremely important, no? And particularly now when Gabriela mentioned the issue of the mirror, no? I think that COVID has been a kind of mirror where you can look at yourself, no? And then I think a lot about culture, and culture is much about identity, who you are and where you stand and how you assume yourself are. And I think we have to talk a lot about gender roles within that aspect, no? Culture, we and they, I and you, man, woman, Swede, immigrant. We have all these different partitions, no? When you see yourself as a certain person, no? And when you have a kind of crisis, when someone asks you, who are you? What do you want? You often feel threatened, no? And you want to think in categories, no? So when we look, for example, at gender, there's always two to tango, no? It's not only an issue about women, it's about men. Men are not only enemies, as you often see in the cultural construct, no? You see men and women through their social roles, no? And I think you have to go out of that box in a way and not only look at this with different fighting things, no? So there are two things I would like to pinpoint. And as a Swede is one thing that I sometimes a bit amazed that people don't think that that is an issue. When I was young in school, you had household knowledge, you had childcare, you had carpentry for girls and textile handicraft for boys. I think that was very good, no? Because you could not have that excuse. I'm a man, I cannot cook, I cannot do textile work, I cannot do these things. That's a stupid cultural excuse. Any man can cook, any man can take care of children, as well as women can do carpentry. We have to take up that in school, not only saying differences and things, but you can do that and you can do that. And that I think is very important to teach that, no? That you can do anything as a man, you can do anything as a woman as well. The other thing that I also found when we had the cultural mirror is this being afraid of looking at certain things. I found that at UNESCO as well. People are extremely afraid of religion, for example. They don't want to talk about religion. They push it aside. They say this is a personal thing. It's not at all a personal thing, it's a cultural thing. We accept, for example, religious bigotry because it's a right to have your own religion. But there are a lot of human rights that are really appalling when Dubravka talk about human rights. I think we have to talk about human rights also in the context of religion. Is religion abusing human rights? If it's doing that, attack these parts of religion. You cannot abuse things in the name of the God, in the name of the religion. So this acceptance of religion is also something that we have to talk and discuss. Is it abusing human rights or not? If it is, we have to address it. So this with the boys' roles that they cannot take care of home care and so on, this about religion, all these things we have to open up, and we cannot see this polarization in culture. And of course, also it's extremely important, the last thing I want to say, youth is important, education is important, but it's also important to see that there are certain differences between men and women as well. And then I talk about health. When I've been around in the world and look at projects and so on, I often see women suffering from horrible diseases and sexual abuse because they don't want to talk about it, because it's not accepted within their culture.
Sorry, Jan, I'll just have to kind of close you up there. Sorry, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think really helpful additional framing. Thank you. Can I turn lastly for this round to Lesia. Lesia, I've seen, I know from your work, you're within European Commission politics. You've done a lot of work, particularly around women's political empowerment, and this is a challenge that many other panelists have spoken to. Would greatly appreciate your thoughts on this question of the main issues and challenges around gender stereotypes in the European context. So you're on mute. Any luck? We'll hold that thought and we'll come back to you. One of the things that has just been mentioned as a question, and I just want to maybe kind of deepen the conversation, is around this, and would appreciate if any of the panelists kind of have thoughts on this, is what are the main challenges around being a man or masculinities in the European context? Is this something that we have to kind of pay attention to? So we identified that patriarchy as a kind of issue that we need to address. Do we need to unpack, and you started talking about it there, Jan, is there a gender stereotype that we really need to kind of pay attention to and think about that in a way impacts on all the things that we've talked about in terms of violence against women, the unpaid care burden, the women's political leadership and empowerment, the women's representation in entrepreneurship? Any thoughts from anyone on the panel on kind of how masculinities is understood in the European context?
Can I come in? Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I've solved the issue, I think.
Great. Well, go ahead, and then if you have any thoughts on that question.
Maybe I can come back to the first question. First of all, I would like to maybe make a small correction the way that you introduced me.
Sorry.
No worries. It's just because this adds to the issue that we're discussing here, is that the Commissioner Elena Dalli is actually Commissioner for Equality and not just gender equality. Now, why is this important? Because when we talk about stereotyping, I mean, what we acknowledge in the gender equality strategy is that gender stereotyping can be harmful, but also is combined with other stereotypes, and it's the whole intersectionality approach that is important to us, and hence why I make the correction. So that we need to take on board when we talk about stereotyping, that it's not just because you are a woman, and it's a little bit what Jan was saying. There are so many things that we take up when we think of ourselves that either allows us to go forward or maybe sometimes stops us from going forward. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And so coming back to the gender equality strategy. So for those of you that don't know that, about almost a year ago, on the 5th of March, Commissioner Dalli presented the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025 with the motto and the vision of a Europe where girls and boys and women and men can strive, lead, and be free. And this for all the aspects in life. So the Thrive chapter is more about the work environment, about the employment and so forth. The lead is about decision making, and the being free is being free from violence, but also from stereotypes. And what the gender equality strategy actually acknowledges is that, as I said, that gender stereotyping combined with other bases of stereotyping, like age, like sexual orientation, disability, can be the root cause of sexism or discrimination against women in all their diversity. And so gender stereotyping is not just an issue, as some of you already said, that is harmful to women, but also to men and boys. And so when we talk about combating gender stereotyping, we also need to take that into consideration and see how also we maybe don't allow boys or men to fully thrive and lead in certain areas. I'm thinking of work-life balance issues, taking care issues is one thing. In that respect, and I mean, the gender equality strategy gives and acknowledges the full spectrum of all the different types and sectors of our life. We are actually looking into launching an EU-wide communication on combating stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and tackling this in all spheres of life through an intersectional approach and focusing on the youth, because we also believe that this goes from a very early age for girls and boys, and that you take it throughout your life into education and then employment and the place that women and men have in society. So I just wanted to say that as a start, and I don't know whether that also maybe answers part of the second question.
That's great, Licia, and really pleased that you are able to join us technologically. Elsa, could I bring you in on this question? Appreciate thoughts that you have on the key challenges and issues in the European context. I know you've done a lot of work on sexism and racism, which connects to what Licia has just said.
Oui, bonjour, je suis désolée, je vais m'excuser.
Yes, hello. I'm going to speak in French because it's much easier for me. So thank you very much for having me. So yes, maybe I could take the example of France, it was quite an exemplary case of contemporary France, because we're in a situation in which we have a legal disposition that is very good when it comes to gender equality. But nevertheless, the current events in France show us that there are still problems. And maybe you've heard of everything that's happening when it comes to the hashtag #MeTooIncest, about freeing people's expression, about allowing young girls and boys to be able to express themselves when it comes to sexual and sexist abuse, especially when it comes to underage children. And there's also been an investigation that has just been launched, that was published by the National Institute of Demographic Studies. This has just been published on the situation of women's and girl violence in France. And this is an investigation that is very important, and it shows that 1 out of 5 women is a victim of family-based violence before the age of 18, and that 1 out of 5 women is a victim of work-based violence, and that 1 out of every 3 women has stated that they've suffered violence after splitting from their partners. These figures are all the more terrifying since we can also see that there are 285,000 victims of sexual abuse by partners or ex-partners. And so if you look at just femicide, in 2019, there were 146 femicides in France, which is a rise of 21% compared to the year before.
The figures for 2020 are worrying as well. There were 100 feminicides, and as you know, an unprecedented increase in the claims of violence in the domestic sphere because of lockdown in the context of the COVID pandemic. So there seems to be sort of a paradox in France, because there are laws, there is a legal background, but there seems to be an issue in terms of prevention, in terms of the culture, the awareness on gender-based violence. And I think this is quite an interesting sort of situation to look at from the outside. And I'd add, if you allow me, that there is an increase of the feminist movement, especially around the idea of sexism in relation with other power struggles, with social inequalities, where people who are victim of racial violence are starting to speak out. There seems to be a liberation and an organization of voices and people speaking out. People say that that voices are finally heard, but voices have always been heard. It's more an action to stop silence, to allow people to start hearing these voices in a way. And I also noticed a very strong feminist organization in France, or a feminist movement in young girls, women, boys, on racism, sexism, and the environment. There's a major, massive movement for climate that is being led by high schoolers. And this shows the importance of organization for solidarity and organizing and fighting against the effects of the patriarchy, but also something that can resemble a sort of a soft patriarchy, so to speak, linked to neoliberalism and the harmful effects of capitalism. And one last thing, we need to be very careful and look very carefully at these emerging voices, feminist voices who are also fighting against social inequality and racism. And maybe we should be worried that, at least in France, the general opinion is quite hostile to anything that has to do with gender-related issues, anything that has to do with prevention on sexual relations and education to equality within schools and curricula. These initiatives are almost all removed by the Ministry of National Education. And there seems to be a focus that is exaggerated on issues that are about criminalizing or sending men to prison when they are responsible for violence against women. And this comes in place of more prevention for equality and more prevention to really stop this patriarchal culture at its roots. And we are very much influenced by this patriarchal culture. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Elsa. And I think that moves us really nicely on to the second question I'd like to explore with the panelists, which is around what are some of the current or emerging solutions to this challenge that we face and we want to address within Europe. And Elsa, thank you. You've really kind of framed the importance of activists and action on the ground. And so, Dubravka, could I come to you first on this question of, what gives you hope, if you feel any hope in these slightly darker times around current and emerging solutions?
Thank you for this question. It seems to me that we really need to focus on implementation of human rights obligations that are already there. And if we look at harmonization of laws with international human rights instruments, we will see in many countries that laws are not at the level as they should be. So it is a myth that laws are fine.
Dubravka, sorry to interrupt you. Please continue. Just letting you know that we can't see you, but please continue.
Okay, let me see what's going on with my. Okay.
But please continue. I'm sorry.
I don't know what's going on with my video. Just something happened. Sorry. So, for example, if we look at rapes and what is happening in Europe, I'm just working on a new thematic report that will address rape and that will be also accompanied with a model law on rape. So it is not sufficient to have provision in a criminal law that is criminalizing rape. We have to see that in many states there are statutes of limitation that are different, also provisions that are basically leading to impunity for rape as a sexual gender-based violence against women and girls. There are many countries in which women are not reporting rape and sexual assault. When they're reporting, only few cases are really prosecuted. When they're prosecuted, only in few cases we are having sentences at the end. So we are seeing a huge impunity. So first, there is a myth that laws are fine. So laws should be in line with international standards, with human rights standards. And fortunately, what is promising here is that we do have legally binding treaties with norms that are addressing gender-based stereotypes. And here I would like to mention something what Jan mentioned with respect to customs and religions that are harmful. So there is obligation in Article 4 on Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women that is calling states not to invoke any custom, tradition, or religious considerations to avoid their obligations to eliminate gender-based violence against women. So we do have a Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. We do have CEDAW, and we do have Istanbul Convention. They're all addressing responsibility of states to eliminate harmful gender-based stereotypes, patriarchal stereotypes that are leading to violence against women and human rights violations. So we do have to go to implementation side and to see which laws should be changed, which norms and practices should be changed, and mindsets to education, of course, should be specifically addressed. So I hope that UNESCO in this initiative will use this human rights framework and will focus on obligations of states with respect to all those frameworks that should be harmonized with international human rights standards that we have developed. And we are far away from this. There are promising steps in direction of working in harmonization of laws with those standards. And Istanbul Convention, Council of Europe Convention on elimination of violence against women and domestic violence is promising, because now many states in Europe are currently changing their criminal law provisions on rape in order to include lack of consent as a main provision in criminalization of rape. So such provision is not yet there in majority of states. For example, if you look at cases addressed by Me Too movement in United States, case of Harvey Weinstein would not be prosecuted in majority of European countries because there is statute of limitation. There are a number of years under which you are not able to prosecute specific crimes. So those are legal provisions and obstacles to address sexual violence, rape, and other issues that should be changed. So I think that we have to look into whole picture and then to look into how states should change, what should be changed in line with international human rights standards, and then what is the role of also of individuals, what is the role of education, how we are going in direction of really using promising practices that we are seeing in different European countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Elaine, can I move on to you on this question? Thank you.
Yes, sure, thank you. In terms of solutions and how we can change culture, as Gabriela mentioned at the beginning, generation equality, I think, would be a very exciting framework to try to operate some of the change that needs to happen. Because if we want to change culture, it's not going to be happening only with the work of activists. It's not going to be only top-down approach that's going to change. We really need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. And so when you look at what we're trying to do with the Action Coalition is to generate collective action, generate commitments, but I think more importantly, trying to generate accountability, because that's what is missing a lot of time when we are talking about changing the culture. We have lots of people saying they are trying, but we don't monitor it that much. And so there are many solutions, concrete solutions that can be put into place, whether you are talking about education and how we make sure that there's no stereotypes in the education material, how we make sure that girls have access to role models and it's part of the teaching in the classroom. Concrete thing also to engage families, because what we see is that families are also the ones that are not pushing or sometimes diverted girls from studying technology. We also want to fight something that is very important, it's online violence. Because when we are talking about role models, where do we see role models? We see them a lot in the media and on social media. And we know that online violence and online harassment is particularly concerning for our women public figures. And so we have to also come together to fight this, because it is silencing voices, voices of public figures, but also the new generation. I think it was very important, was one mentioned that youth, I think it was by Elsa, that youth are really coming up and sizing a lot of these key messages, but we need to support them because they face a lot of backlash online. And maybe the last point, also to link on your question on masculinity, we need to fix workplaces. And when we talk about tech, we need to really have a dialogue and address masculinity at work, because what we see when we talk with men working in the tech sector is that very often they push aside the assumptions that there are stereotypes in the tech world. They're treating the lack of women in technology mainly as a pipeline issue, think that there are not enough girls that are interested to study, or that would that are in school right now choosing to be scientists, and we know that it's not the case. But a lot of them are saying it's more of a pipeline issue, or it's an issue of merits, and they completely set aside all the recognition that social interactions are also very important when you develop your career. Your networks help you find jobs. The time you spend with your colleagues after work help you get promotion, help you get more opportunity, help you be mentored by more senior people. And they don't realize how difficult it is for women in tech to have these same opportunities. So I'll stop there, but I really think that having this new movement is going to be an exciting way to see how we can push the needle and push it much more than what we're doing right now.
Great, thank you very much. Elida, could I move on to you, please, on this question?
Thank you very much, Tim. Yes, when I think of things that give me hope, two things come up to my mind. First of all, I'm very glad that all of our panelists are quite supportive of young people raising their voices and having a more active role. So one thing that gives me hope is the energy, the dynamic energy and the enthusiasm of fellow young activists. And the second thing is the increasing role of different and new role models. So first, about youth activism and representation of youth, we need to focus on youth representation a little bit more, especially if we want to fight against gender stereotypes. I mean, it's a huge task, but we can only put an effective fight through intergenerational understanding of gender stereotypes. And this can only be done if we have young people, not as inspirational speakers in these fancy summits every once in a while, but as representatives in decision-making tables. They have to have a space to talk, to share their problems. They have to have a right to vote for decisions that are shaping these very important and very big campaigns. I think Generation Equality campaign and Generation Equality Forum is a good example in that sense. I am a proud member of the Generation Equality Youth Task Force, and we have suggested the Generation Equality team to have youth representatives in the core group, to have youth-led organizations in each action group. And we were so lucky that they were so supportive and so welcoming, but it's not the case for every young person, every young activist. So we really need to keep that in mind. And secondly, I want to talk very briefly about role models. Especially in European contexts, we have new role models for young girls, which is very encouraging. However, we also need to think about what kinds of role models we have. For example, Christine Lagarde is a wonderful role model in the European context, but she may not be very relatable for a girl of color who are coming from an immigration background, who are coming from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background. So we need to make sure that the role models we are putting under spotlight are also women of color, queer individuals, male role models at the same time. So diversity in terms of the role models that we're promoting is incredibly important. Yeah, I will try to keep it to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jan, could I move on to you, please, if you would like to comment on this? Jan, I think you're on mute again.
Okay. Having been working, getting old now, and having been working for the UN, what gives me hope is that a global, not private organization like the UN has done so much for equality, gender equality. I think without the UN, without a global organization like the UN, we couldn't have achieved what we have achieved. Much has to be done, but I'm, for example, with Dubravka, that the law is very important for changing these things. Even if you don't follow the law, if the law is there, we can really lean on it. And I think the human rights promoted by the UN are extremely important, because the human rights, they stay above bigotry, they are above religion. No? It's about to take care of one another. It's about compassion. No? So I think the UN and the rules and laws by UN are extremely important because they are global and they are general. And I would also like to take up a bit what Elsa said about sex, no? And I talked about religion, but you must help me there. I think Elida and Dubravka knows more about this than I do. But if I'm not wrong, the Istanbul Convention also had this fear of sex, just like religion, no? And you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it takes up like prostitution, human trafficking, and child marriage. I'm not quite sure, but I know that in Sweden we have often talked about that, because Swedish legislation is really looking at prostitution, human trafficking, and child marriage. So this fear of religion and sex, we have to get rid of that. We have to have a discussion about it. And also this about role models always make me a little bit worried, because we put people on pedestal, no? But a lot of them are falling from them. And then we feel this was not right. This was not the right person to put all. I think it's more a general thing about compassion and being more soft. For example, male generalization. You hear a lot about male chauvinism, and that's okay. And men are horrible when it comes to violence, when it comes to power. But you don't have this other male picture, for example. I remember when I was at Unesco, I asked, why don't you make a program about love poetry written by men? And everyone thought that was ridiculous, that idea, no? But why not take up this side, no, of love between man and woman, love between man and man, whatever, no? But, you know, love, compassion, religion, sex, these are very dangerous areas, and they are culture. It's about power, no? So we have to attack and go in there, no, in the very dangerous zones, no? I think UNESCO has a role to play there, no? And they can do it because I think the UN has such great impact on the gender issues, for example, no?
Great, thank you very much. We were having some excellent comments in the chat box, and also several people are posing questions. So thank you very much. We're going to move to questions in a moment after we've brought in the two final speakers. Lesia, if you would like to comment on this question of solutions.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I had also thought of what gives me hope. What gives me hope is actually the fact that I do think that there are things that are changing. I mean, you see more role models. If I take the European example, the fact that we have for the first time a woman president of the Commission that has been able to put together for the first time a gender balanced commission, that she has put forward the political will of putting equality and gender equality high on the political agenda. With concrete policy proposals and a budget that follows, that is a gender budgeted budget. I mean, those are the things that are hopeful to me, because that's the change that we are noticing. And just yesterday, we've seen the same role models coming up in the inauguration ceremony. So that gives me hope. what also gives me hope is that despite the fact that indeed the pandemic has been a very tough situation for many of us, it has highlighted inequalities that already existed, and that we can use this experience as a way of changing things. And I think it was maybe Elaine that was saying it, that this will not come without doing something about it. I mean, the change will not happen out of itself. And there, in particular, on the pandemic and how it has impacted inequalities, one of the positive thing is the whole teleworking. I mean, I think that for ages we've been trying to promote this as something that would help rebalance the way we work, the way we all contribute to work, the way we all contribute to other responsibilities. And somehow it was hard to break through. But with this, we had all to move into that mode. Now, where I do put up the red flag is that let's also be careful that the way we get out of this whole pandemic and the whole teleworking setup, or in some cases, there have been member states that put forward special COVID leave programs, that this in the long term do not only fall back on women taking that up. And so that men go back to the office, back to work, and women stay at home and try to do the teleworking with the work and taking those special leaves to take care of children. So I think we can use this opportunity to see what has worked and what is positive in order to change things and take that forward like this. If we're talking about solutions or recommendations, I also have a couple of things I would like to put forward, but Tim, tell me whether you want me to wait.
Could I just jump in there, and it would be great if you could hold those and perhaps include them as part of the recommendations. And Elsa, if I can come to you finally on this question of solutions. I know you outlined some already when you spoke earlier, but would greatly appreciate your thoughts.
Oui, c'était juste très rapidement.
Yes, very quickly. Just to go back to the issue of the importance of legal dispositions, I think that we also have to pay attention to material conditions of living conditions that would allow people to benefit from legal equality provisions. The social conditions have to be there to enable people to benefit from laws that protect empowerment and emancipation and equality between people. And just to go back to the issue on the human rights and religion, if you focus specifically on sexual violence, on cyber bullying, on rape, on intimate partner violence and femicide, I just wanted to let you know that in a situation that is very secular, there is rape that takes place in all environments, in very secular environments that are more upper class, that have a republican culture, if I may say so, that even there is violence, and it's difficult for this violence to leave the silent sphere, and we're having trouble to break the taboo in these situations. And just the last thing I wanted to react to on what Gileada said when talking about Christine Lagarde. I think role models are important, but beyond these figures and the representation of such and such a figure, I think that the issue of principles is important. It's also what women defend. These women who are in leadership positions, what are they defending? The defense of equality, of climate justice, of social inclusion, of fighting racism. When women embody these ideas, and I'm thinking of several figures that are very important today in feminist movements and for young people, I think it's these principles that have to be heard today through the feminist movements. And this also begs the question, what is the reference topic that we're basing ourselves on in order to develop these laws when it comes to gender equality? Who is the woman, the typical woman, the situation that we're using as a benchmark in in our laws? And so if we place ourselves in a situation, in a reference situation that's the most complicated, that's the poorest, that's the most vulnerable, when we're trying to set up these laws for gender equality, then the laws will be better.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Wow, what a fantastic and rich conversation, and I feel like we could keep this going for another hour or so. And we've had some really excellent questions, and I want to put some of them back to the panel now, and I think many touch on several of the issues that we've already addressed. And thank you to everybody, over 120 now, who are listening in and participating and also posting information about their work in the chat. Please continue to do so. Kind of pick up 5 issues, and I'll come back to the panel in reverse order. So Elsa, I'll start with you, and you please pick on whichever you feel you would like to address. I think the first one is about the media, and we've talked a little bit about the media, but kind of how do we address the kind of gender stereotypes within the media? As the media, could be a positive and a challenging space. And I think secondly, some differing comments also in relation to the digital world, and and the fact that there are huge benefits of digital communication, social media, but also that often kind of significantly reinforces negative gender stereotypes. So any thoughts on how do we engage with digital communities and social media? A really interesting question, I think, about the kind of the interconnection between gender equality and racism or gender inequality. And I think one of the stereotypes that was reflected by the questioner around the fact that often Black men are more violent, or Black women are kind of more easily manipulated, and how in a way do we talk about gender stereotypes without reinforcing, I guess, a particular, not only a patriarchal binary, but also, a kind of white supremacist potential binary. So I think a really important question there. Fourthly, on a question of data collection and what role does data collection on gender equality play? And then lastly, and of course, these are all small questions, but several people really talking about, well, how do we be concrete about this? What are concrete strategies? How do we go beyond education? Is it community level action? Is it teaching people basic skills such as empowerment and respect? What are the concrete ways in which we can shift gender norms beyond kind of images of people who are equitable, important as those are? So please pick on whichever you would like to respond to. And Elsa, I'll come to you first.
Yes, thank you very much. These are really very interesting questions. I'm going to be very quick, but when it comes to media, I think the media have a fundamental role, of course. The media space was essential for the issue of feminicide to be not to be simply seen as a little event or a family drama or something that is an expression of that would euphemize and depoliticize this problem, this issue of violence, of brutal violence against women. But at the same time, I see that in the French media space and even in the European media space, there is a trend to anti-feminism. And there are certain positions that are taken today. And these positions identify feminism as an ideology or stigmatizes feminist movements. And I think that when this is repeated by the media, this strengthens sexist stereotypes. So even if we deploy great efforts to fight against stereotypes, but if at the same time we continue to tarnish and to pinpoint and stigmatize the feminist movement and women's expression, especially when it comes to the Me Too movement, for example, things quickly become very problematic. Last thing, when it comes to the relationship between fighting sexism and racism, one has to say that historically part of a certain kind of rhetoric that supported gender equality and women's autonomy has been instrumentalized for racism and nationalism. And this has happened in this colonial and post-colonial environment, and this is linked to different issues linked to the post-September 11th context. For a while in Europe, many feminists have said, not in our name, do not use the issue of gender equality in order to back up racist stereotypes. And one has to remember that violence against women is something that impact all social classes and all religious communities and all different identities and cultural identities. So one has to be very vigilant to make sure that there is not an opposition made between what would be a so-called good equality, or good gender equality, or gender liberation, which would follow a capitalist sort of logic and would stigmatize certain social groups or individuals. And that's why I've insisted that laws be pragmatic. And I'll give you one last example. If programs were proposed, legal programs, or if we set up instruments for equality that would use as a reference a woman who works as a clerk in a supermarket and works and lives on the outskirts of a large city, and worked during COVID and had to keep going to work during COVID, where she had to find solutions for her children. Well, if we used that sort of person, that sort of situation as a reference, as a benchmark, in order to put forward different aids to help equality, this would be a good way to be very concrete in our efforts.
Can I?
Thank you very much, Lesia. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Merci, Elsa, pour cet exposé.
Thank you very much, Elsa.
Lesia, we've lost you again. I'm sorry.
No, sorry, it was me. So I just thanked Elsa for her presentation, and just to build up on that, what I wanted to say is that indeed the role models that we have are important, but role models also go through the images that we use, and so that's what Elsa was touching upon, but also the words that we use, and they can be very powerful, especially when you talk about women that are victims of violence. Of course, they're victims, so we can't deny that, and we should not deny that, but it's the way that it's presented in the media, indeed, that is important, that it's actually the perpetrator that is at fault and not the victim. So that I think is important, but what can help in that and making sure that things are looked at from that perspective is the gender mainstreaming. Now, I know that gender mainstreaming has become a bit of a word that we use left, right, and center, but what it means, and we are really doing a huge work on that here in the Commission, is to look in all the fields, all the policy fields from an equality perspective. So that very early on, when you draft policies, that you start thinking already of that. And so that when it comes to the highest level of political decision making, that it's already included. And what we have done to do that, we've set up within the Commission the Equality Task Force, and the Equality Task Force links all the DGs, so going from fisheries to finance to digital to employment to agriculture. So all the DGs have like an equality coordinator, and that they are in touch when it comes to specific policy drafting that is happening, or they connect to see like what can we do together in order to improve equality. And there it's not just gender equality, but it's equality in the largest or larger sense. So the gender mainstreaming is a good tool to make sure that we look from a policy perspective from an early stage, but also that we involve people and women in the different policy draftings and making and decision making, so that the result isn't from an equality perspective.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I just remind the remaining speakers to please try and keep their comments as short as possible, and I'll move on to you now, Jan. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to look into the media aspect, because when we talk about COVID, I think of isolation. And I think one of the problems with the modern media is isolation. I think about my young pupils. Many of them don't read books, they don't read newspapers, they even don't watch TV, but they go into the web, no? And then they enter into secluded information areas, as reservations for breeding conspiracy theories, crazy ideas. We have seen it in the United States. I won't go into that, but there you have a media world that is not reality. And people are more and more able to choose to enter into these secluded worlds where they mirror themselves with the most strange ideas. And people live inside there, particularly now in these COVID times, no? So I think sometimes you say that gender mainstreaming, good politics, everything, but some people are just living in these small boxes, and it's not a problem that they don't believe in anything. They believe in everything. There's no way of shaking things up. And I think that is a very dangerous thing with modern media nowadays, no?
Great, thank you, Jan. Elida, could I move on to you on these questions?
Yeah, of course. Then, just two very brief points I want to share. One is I do believe that the lack of gender segregated data, and while I say gender segregated, I also want to emphasize that we should not have an exclusively gender binary approach, of course, but gender segregated data, like the lack of the data, is often merely mentioned and it's not followed up on. So I can suggest and recommend for this flagship program to maybe come up with a network or a monitoring mechanism in which UNESCO could kind of maybe facilitate a network among national statistical institutes to kind of keep up on the lacking data, because it is incredibly important. And secondly, about media, I think we should, especially talking from the perspective of Generation Y and Generation Z, social media in the digital world has become our traditional media, has become our mainstream media. I do not buy newspapers anymore, but I read newspapers online. The thing is, I think we need to kind of get away from a state-centric approach in this one and have private sector representatives as stakeholders in every meeting, particularly considering having gender equal and gender inclusive codes of conducts for social media companies, for digital private sector representatives. So it is always important to include them because they have an incredible impact. I mean, we have seen the latest example with Twitter and the suspension of President Trump's account. It had a huge, huge impact. So we need to take that into consideration too. That's all.
Great, thank you. Elena?
Thank you. Well, I think I'm obviously going to pick the question on digital, and as we say very often at UN Women, is that digitalization is one of the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest threats to gender equality. And so, yes, it brings more economic opportunities, social opportunities. You can have new jobs, new knowledge, connect with your loved one. And we've seen with COVID that it's actually what was maybe a nice to have is really becoming a must have. If you're not connected, you can't work, you can't study, you can't shop. So this is important, and it brings all these aspects, but it does come with threats. And the main reason for that is that it's because it has been designed by men. And when we design tools, we design tools using our own experience. So it's not to say that there's been an explicit design to enshrin bias in the technology, but it's just there because it's mostly men who are designing technology. And really, what we see is that we need more women in tech, but we don't need more women in tech to fix the problem. We just need them for parity reason. But tech companies that are developing digital tools need to be much more intentional into developing tools that are gender transformative and that are meeting the needs of women, that are safe for them to use, that respect their privacy. And I think it's fair to say that it's not number one on their priority list at the moment, and that they react to that mostly when some of their tools become very visible in the news as being biased. We've seen that with Apple Pay. We've seen that with the Amazon recruitment algorithm that was discriminating women more than men. So I think there's a lot, we need to put pressure on tech if we want this to happen. And if not, we will see tech as an accelerator of gender gaps, unfortunately.
Great, thank you very much. Dubravka, could I bring you in on these questions? Thank you. I think you're muted. Sorry, Dubravka.
Unmute. Okay, do you hear me?
Thank you. Yeah, great.
So I have just stated that I have published a report on online violence against women. And what is important to recognize that this digital world is real world, and digital space is also public space, and human rights are applicable also in digital world. So we really need to consider how to really implement human rights norms also there. And I would like to go back to this fear of gender, of sex. And now we have backlash in Europe, what is very important, against women's rights and gender equality. So it would be very important for UNESCO to look into what is behind those that are protesting against the Istanbul Convention as a new convention addressing violence against women. When you see young boys and girls protesting against the Istanbul Convention, you must really consider how is this possible? What is behind it? And there is specific article in Istanbul Convention related to education in schools with respect to gender equality and elimination of violence against women. And those that are protesting, they're also focusing on that article that will prevent parents to have proper education. And they are seeing gender equality as a threat. So we have to see how to uphold those rights that we have really secured in CEDAW Convention, in Istanbul Convention, in Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And we really need to go into basics. And let me finish my brief statement with importance of data. It was stated by many panelists that we need to have good data. But for example, if you look at data on violence against women, femicides data or data related to gender-related killings of women are not considered as a part of data on violence against women. Many countries have such data in homicide data. They don't have, when they speak about violence against women, they focus on psychological violence, physical violence, all forms of violence that are there, but not on homicides and femicides. Femicides or gender-related killings of women. And now there is a focus on femicides. I have launched a femicide watch in order to have comparable data for all states with respect to intimate partner killings, family-related killings of women, and the other types of femicides. And what is coming out that in 10 cases of intimate partner killings, victims, if you look at victims, more than 80%, 80 to 90% of victims are women. So this is clearly showing that this is gender-based violence against women with respect to
this focus on what should be done to prevent such cases. And I'm calling all states to analyze each case of such femicide in order to see what was missed in prevention side. And here, if we look in different prevention steps that were missed by police, by prosecutions, and so on, we are seeing many gender stereotypes at the level of police officers, at the level of public prosecutors, at the level of judiciary. So stereotypes, gender stereotypes are very harmful and they're everywhere. So we need to unpack them. We need to really focus on concrete measures, how to recognize them, how to eliminate them, and how to really harmonize our norms and practices and change mindset in line with all those human rights instruments that we have. And I think that Gabriela Ramos at the beginning pointed out that it is really important to change mindsets. And here I would like to add mindsets through all those frameworks that we have developed in the area of human rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We've only got a couple of minutes left. We're coming to a close. Thank you everybody who's been participating so actively, and to all the speakers for those tremendous responses. Just want to remind you, we're going to move quickly to recommendations for UNESCO. We're just about at time, and I'm going to ask each of the speakers if they could just give one top recommendation for what UNESCO could do as it takes forward this flagship program. Everybody who's online, we are listening to you. We have been watching what you're posting, and we haven't been able to cover everything, but we will take your feedback. So please also post your recommendations now to what you think UNESCO should do around changing mindsets. So quickly, and I will ask you to keep this short. Again, if I could go first to back to reverse order again, and Dubravka, if I could ask you just to give your one top recommendation for this initiative.
Use human rights-based approach. I think that human rights-based approach is the key. It should be a human rights-based approach integrated in education and all other areas that UNESCO is going to address. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Elsa?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that what we need to do is to integrate in the approach. We need to involve the people who are most concerned, the young girls and the women that are most involved in these different issues, and that they really have to be at the heart of things, that they have to work in setting up these recommendations.
Great, thank you. Hélène?
And plus one to what Elsa just said, and maybe to add to that, also invest in partnerships, because we need action, and we won't have the push that we want to see if we work in silos. So make sure that you develop a partnership approach so that we can join forces.
Great, thank you. Elida?
It won't be a surprise, but focusing on youth participation in decision-making mechanisms will be my solid advice.
Great, thank you. Jan?
I'm inclined to agree with Dubravka. A human rights approach to everything that UNESCO is doing, and a concentration on the future, meaning young people and the environment.
Great, thank you. Lesia?
I would say a gender equality and gender mainstreaming approach from a very young age. And this goes also through words that we use, the images that we use, and making sure that we work on issues that are important to the future. So I was going to say the Green Deal, digitalization, and demographic challenge.
Great. Thank you all very much. Could we give a huge round of applause? I know that we're just over time to the panelists. Thank you all very much. As always, when you get a whole set of fantastic individuals on this, there's a really rich conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining online and participating. You will have seen information has been posted around the forthcoming regional consultations. There is still 3 more to go, and we will be having one on Monday on Latin America at 3:30 Central European time. So please join us if you can, or please advertise to other people, and we will keep in touch. There was a question from a participant online about how do we get involved, how do we support this initiative, and we will come back to people who are interested to take part. There's a link that will be shared in the chat to ask for your input and feedback on this event. And so please do keep in touch with us. We would love to engage all of you, as we'd love to engage the distinguished panelists in the future of this flagship program. I think we've really heard that Europe has many benefits in terms of its advancements, not least around its legal and policy advancements, though many things still need to be addressed here. But I think this has been a real reminder of just how critically important shifting these mindsets are and engaging everybody and selling the benefits of gender equality. I think, as Dubravka and Lesia said, you know, so that gender equality is not seen as a threat, particularly not seen as a threat amongst men who are often not part of the conversation, as the UN Goodwill Ambassador Emma Watson said. So let's all move together. Let's move forward. Thank you so much for your participation. I'm grateful for this tremendous engagement, and please keep in touch and look forward to that. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.